Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. The Department of Toxic Substances Control, known as DTSC, is hosting this meeting. Tonight, we will be talking about the proposed cleanup activities at the Naval Petroleum Reserve, also known as NPR-1, which is located on the Elk Hills oil field. My name is Jessica Swan. I'm the Public Participation Specialist for this project. This meeting is being recorded, and by joining, you're agreeing to be recorded. So I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today, especially during these challenging times, and we hope that you and your families are keeping safe. So this meeting is scheduled from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. The purpose of this meeting is to provide you with more information about the proposed cleanup options at NPR-1, to respond to any of your questions and comments, and to accept public comment for the open public comment period. The comment period is open now and it will close on March 17th. If you would like to submit your comments outside of this meeting, please contact Ryan Mitchum using the contact information that is on this slide. Ryan is the DTSC project manager and will be delivering tonight's presentation. The presentation is about 30 minutes and we will follow it with a question and answer period. Tonight, we also have with us Wayne Elias, who is the program coordinator from the U.S. Department of Energy, and Chris Smith from ATNA Facility Services, ATNA is the consultant for DOE. They will also be available during the Q&A period. The presentation slides are presented in both English and Spanish, with English on the left and Spanish on the right. We want to ensure that all of our participants are able to receive the same information, so there may be times when our presenters pause to allow additional time for interpretation. So when entering this meeting, you are placed on mute. We ask that you remain on mute during the presentation. During the Q&A portion of the meeting, you can raise your hand or type your question into the chat. You can use the chat feature throughout the presentation to type your questions and comments to us. If you're joining us by phone, you can press *6 to unmute again during the Q&A period, and please wait to be called upon after unmuting. We will repeat these instructions at the top of the Q&A period. And lastly, please know that we are hosting from different locations and we request that you bear with us if there are any technical issues. We sincerely appreciate your patience, understanding, and cooperation in making this a successful meeting. I will now invite our presenter, Ryan, DTSC Project Manager, to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. I first want to start off by talking about what the Department of Toxic Substance Control, or DTSC, is. DTSC is a part of the California Environmental Protection Agency, which includes multiple different agencies that regulate everything from pesticides to air quality to groundwater to how hazardous wastes are recycled and handled. Specifically, DTSC is a state regulatory agency responsible for the oversight of cleanup of hazardous waste sites or sites where hazardous materials are present and pose a potential risk to human health or the environment. DTSC employs scientists, engineers, toxicologists, and many more trained staff to support these decisions. When making decisions regarding sites, DTSC looks at concentrations of hazardous chemicals in soil, gas, and groundwater when necessary. Lastly, DTSC is responsible for regulating hazardous waste throughout the state. Now you know who we are, but why are we here? The last thing we want to do is step into your community and remediate these sites without listening to your opinions. I certainly wouldn't want somebody stepping into my neighborhood and making decisions without taking my input. The Department of Energy is proposing to clean up multiple areas of concern within Elk Hills. These plans are described in 7 draft remedy selection and statement of basis work plans, which are larger cleanups, and 3 draft interim measures removal action work plans, which are smaller scale cleanups compared to those presented in the remedy selection and statement of basis documents. In the work plans, we describe exactly how we're going to remediate the sites and what measures we're going to take during the remediations to ensure the public's health and safety. All of these documents are available for review in the Taft Library, on our website called EnviroStore, and at the DTSC Clovis Field Office. Additionally, if you would like to see any of the documents, please reach out to either Jessica or I, and we can verify that you get an opportunity to review them. You can submit comments in several different ways. One way is to type the comments into the chat during this Zoom meeting. Another way is to make a verbal comment during the question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Additionally, you can mail in comments using the form attached to the community update that was mailed out to the community, or you can email comments to myself or Jessica. DTSC will not issue a final determination regarding the work plans before all comments received during the public comment period are considered. We will evaluate all of the comments received and respond to them in what's called a responsiveness summary. Everybody who submitted a comment will receive a copy of the responsiveness summary once the comment period is complete. There are many people involved with the cleanup of Elk Hills. I would first like to take a minute to go through the list of these names that you will see in the documents and explain what their roles are in this process. First is the U.S. Department of Energy. They are the responsible party, which means they are the ones who are responsible for paying for and implementing the cleanups. California Resources Corporation, Elk Hills, which replaced Occidental of Elk Hills Incorporated, who originally purchased the oil field from the United States Department of Energy, currently owns the site. Chevron is a former owner-operator on a portion of Elk Hills and is still involved in reviewing the proposed remediations. Lastly, the Kern County Waste Management Division is also involved in overseeing operations on Elk Hills, as it is within Kern County. Additionally, there are multiple regulatory agencies that oversee operations at Elk Hills. One of those is my organization, DTSC. Another is the Kern County Environmental Health Department, as they are responsible for environmental health issues in Kern County. Another is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who verifies that the remediations do not adversely impact the environment or any sensitive species that may occupy the sites. Another is the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, as they regulate waste discharge requirements associated with oil field operations. The U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife is involved for the same reasons that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is involved, just to make sure that there are no ecological impacts from the remediations. Lastly, the California State Historic Preservation Office and the Native American Heritage Foundation are involved to ensure that no cultural resources are impacted by these remediations. Now I'd like to go through the history of NPR1, starting from 1912 to where it is today. In 1912, President Taft set aside NPR1 by executive order to ensure that the United States has the resources necessary in case of times of need. In 1944, a contract was signed between the federal government and Standard Oil to begin development of the field as a reserve field. Between 1944 and 1975, The oil field was operated by Standard Oil in cooperation with the federal government. In 1976, Congress directed that NPR-1 be fully developed. In 1977, operation of NPR-1 transferred from the Navy to the U.S. Department of Energy. During that time, the field was operated by private contractors in cooperation with the federal government. These contractors included Williams Brothers Engineering and Bechtel Corporation. In 1996, Congress passed a law that stated that the Department of Energy was required to sell all of the United States lands and hydrocarbon interests in NPR-1. In 1997, the sale was completed to Occidental Petroleum Corporation, which is now California Resources Incorporated, Elk Hills. As a result of this sale, the Department of Energy and the Department of Toxic Substance Control entered into a consent agreement in 1997 to assess and remediate as necessary the environmental impacts that occurred during the time the Department of Energy operated the oil field. In 1998, DTSC completed a Resource Conservation and Recovery Act facility assessment for NPR-1. This assessment identified multiple areas of concern or areas that need to be looked at further at NPR-1. In 2008, DTSC and the Department of Energy entered into a corrective action consent agreement to address these identified areas of concern. In total, there were 131 areas of concern identified. Within these 131 areas of concern, there were 1,060 sub-areas identified. These sub-areas represent individual portions of each area of concern. DTSC requires the Department of Energy to pursue further investigations and corrective measures as necessary for protection of human health and the environment at these areas of concern. Lastly, the oil field is currently owned by California Resources Elk Hills LLC and is one of the largest active oil fields in the lower 48 states. It is also the largest gas-producing oil field in California. Now I'd like to talk about how these areas of concern are addressed. In 2010, the Department of Energy contracted Ahtna Facility Services Incorporated to implement the requirements of the Corrective Action Consent Agreement. To support the requirements of the Corrective Action Consent Agreement, Ahtna prepared multiple documents that covered the entire site. These documents included a quality assurance plan, a human health risk protocol, and a background metals protocol. These documents were prepared to ensure that the investigation and remediation are both reasonable and protective of human health and the environment. These documents also ensure consistency regarding how each area of concern is addressed. After each area of concern is investigated, DTSC makes one of three determinations. The first determination is called a no further action. This determination can be made when either a site is investigated and is determined that there are no chemicals of concern present, or after a site is remediated and the chemicals of concern have either been removed or the risk posed by the chemicals of concern has been adequately mitigated. The next kind of determination that DTSC can make is called a no further action by risk assessment. This means that the area of concern has been fully investigated and it has been determined that the concentrations of chemicals of concern at the area do not pose a significant threat to human health and the environment. Lastly, DTSC can decide that further action or remediation is necessary to ensure that the area of concern does not pose a risk to human health or the environment. In this case, DTSC continues to work with the Department of Energy on the site until a no further action determination can be granted. I'd like to give you an idea of the current status of all of the areas of concern on NPR1. Again, areas of concern are portions of NPR1 that have been identified as potentially having elevated concentrations of chemicals of potential concern. As of February 1st, 2021, 108 of the 131 areas of concern, or 532 of the 1,060 sub-areas, have been awarded a no further action determination by DTSC. This means that it has been determined that the area of concern does not pose a significant threat to human health or the environment. The remaining 23 areas of concern are either pending remediation or regulatory review of planned remediations. This image is to give you an idea of the distribution of the areas of concern across NPR1. As you can see, the areas of concern are spread across the entire site and range in size between approximately 1/4 of an acre to approximately 20 acres. You can see that NPR1 is generally bound by Tutman to the east, Dustin Acres to the south, McKittrick to the west, and Buttonwillow to the north. Now I'd like to discuss how the work plans that are out for your review are organized. In these work plans, 6 alternatives that can be used to clean up the AOC, or area of concern, were evaluated. These alternatives typically range from doing almost nothing at all to excavating and removing all of the contamination at the area of concern. As part of this evaluation, the Department of Toxic Substance Control looked at the effectiveness of the remediation technique. For example, does it provide adequate long-term protection of human health and the environment? And does it reduce toxicity, mobility, and the volume of the contamination? Additionally, the proposed remediations are evaluated by the landowners to verify that the remediations do not adversely affect their operations. The implementability of each of the alternatives was assessed to verify that each alternative is technically feasible for implementation with the resources available. Lastly, the relative cost of each alternative was evaluated to verify that a reasonable approach was selected. Each of the work plans proposed one of the 6 alternatives based off of this evaluation. DTSC has determined that the selected remediations in each document are appropriate. Now that I've told you how we evaluate these proposed remediations, I'd like to tell you what we're remediating for. The chemical of concern we most encounter at NPR1 is arsenic. The arsenic is from a fluid that used to be put in wells to limit corrosion. These are the AOCs that are being remediated for arsenic contamination. 030-001 in approximately 3-acre sub, 030-003 in approximately 12-acre disposal and drainage area, 038-003 in approximately 2-acre catch basin, which is essentially a low area that collects liquids, 044-001, a former storage tank setting, 044-002, a former tank setting and piping area covering approximately 3 acres, and AOC 053, which are 3 connected overflow sumps and occupies approximately 2.5 acres. Lastly, there is area of concern 073-002, which is a truck washout sump and occupies approximately 3/4 of an acre. 2 of the areas of concern are being remediated for hexavalent chromium impacts. Hexavalent chromium was used as an additive in several products at Elk Hills. These areas of concern are 119-005 and 119-018. Both are about half an acre. One area of concern is being remediated for arsenic, hexavalent chromium, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. PAHs are one part of hydrocarbons that can be carcinogenic. This area of concern's number is 125-016 and is approximately half an acre. Area of concern 115-001, an approximately quarter-acre former underground storage tank setting, is being remediated for arsenic and lead in soil and multiple volatile organic compounds in soil and soil gas. Volatile organic compounds can be sourced from many things and, like PAHs, can be carcinogenic. Lastly, there's area of concern 072, an approximately 0.4 acre oil recovery zone. This AOC is being remediated for arsenic and lead in soil and PAHs and volatile organic compounds in soil and soil gas. Now that you know what's at each of these areas of concern, let's talk about how we plan to remediate them. For most of the remediations, we plan on excavating the contaminated soil and replacing that soil with clean soil. Before an area of concern can be backfilled with clean soil, that soil must be tested per DTSC standards to verify that it is appropriate to be placed on the site. Each of the proposed remedies meets the objectives of minimizing potential exposure, reducing on-site contamination in soil and/or soil gas, and is protective of human health and the environment as it meets the established DTSC cleanup goals. Now, let's go into a little more detail on what's going to happen at each individual area of concern. At areas of concern 030-001, 030-003, 038-003, 044-001, 053, 073-001, 073-002, 119-005, 119-018, and 125-016, we will be using a traditional excavation and offsite disposal technique. This means that construction equipment, such as excavators and loaders, will be used to remove the contaminated soil at the area of concern. Then that soil will be placed into trucks and hauled away to appropriate disposal facilities such as landfills. Clean soil will then be brought in to replace the removed contaminated soil. At area of concern 115-001, a large diameter auger will be used in addition to the traditional excavation equipment to remove the soil. A large diameter auger is a type of excavator that can drill straight down to very deep depths where traditional excavation equipment cannot easily reach. The excavated materials will then be removed in the same way as the other areas of concern. At all of the areas of concern mentioned so far, almost if not all of the contamination will be removed. Therefore, no land use restrictions will be necessary. At area of concern 072, we are proposing to excavate to a minimum of 10 feet below ground surface and then backfill the excavation with clean soil. Although we will not be removing all of the contamination, the 10 feet of clean soil provides a protective cover that ensures that people or ecological receptors will not be affected by the contamination. As an additional safety measure, a land use restriction will be required for the site that limits future land use by not allowing sensitive receptors, such as residences, schools, or hospitals, to be constructed at the site in the future. At Area of Concern 044-002, we are proposing to excavate the contaminated soil. However, it is not feasible or possible to remove all of the contamination. Therefore, the contamination that can be removed will be, and land use restrictions, like those used at Area of Concern 072, will be required for those areas that were inaccessible. As I mentioned earlier, most of these remediations will be implemented using traditional construction equipment, such as excavators, backhoe loaders, and bulldozers. Additionally, a large diameter auger machine will be used where necessary. When using heavy equipment, such as these machines, to excavate contaminated soil, additional measures must be taken. These additional measures include dust monitoring before and during the excavation activities, and transporting the soil excavated in covered dump trucks. Approximately 60 loads of soil will be transported a day as excavations are being conducted. Once all of the contaminated soil has been removed from the area of concern, the clean material that is brought in will be regraded and compacted. The landowner may replace infrastructure in the future. This figure shows the routes that the trucks will take to bring the contaminated soil to either the McKittrick Waste Landfill or the Clean Harbors Buttonwillow Landfill. This map is a little hard to see. If you would like any clarification of where these routes are compared to your residence or business, reach out to either Jessica and I, and we can provide you with that information. This brings us to what might be the most important slide in this presentation. What are the risks posed by these areas of concern as they stand now? As they stand now, these areas of concern have a variety of different contaminants, including metals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and volatile organic compounds. Metals and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in VOCs affect the body through ingestion, inhalation, and dermal contact. Exposure to VOCs can also occur via or through the migration of vapors into buildings. The proposed remediations will address all of these concerns by eliminating the possibility for exposure to these chemicals of concern. Additionally, NPR1 is closed to the public, so there is no risk to the general public of exposure. Workers on NPR1 are trained to handle impacted soils in a way that ensures that they are protected, and measures are in place to ensure that the contaminated soil does not spread into the community while it is being transported. Lastly, groundwater beneath NPR1 is typically too deep for the chemicals of concern addressed in this work plan or these work plans to impact. The groundwater wells that supply the communities adjacent to Elk Hills pump from an aquifer that is distinct in both geology and extent from the one below Elk Hills. Contamination is limited to the identified areas and has not affected residences in the vicinity of NPR1. At this point, I'll turn the presentation back over to Jessica, who will begin the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. So at this time, we will again begin the question and answer session of this meeting. So please remain on mute until you are called upon. If you have a question or comment, you can raise your hand. This function is found either on your toolbar if you're using a desktop, or in the three little buttons on the side if you're using a mobile phone. And so you can use the raise your hand function, or you can use the chat function to ask us a question. If you are on the phone, we will get to phone questions in a moment. At that time, you'll press *6 to unmute. We'll do our best to respond to all the questions. We have an hour and a half to do so, so hopefully we will be able to get to all of your questions. So please stay on mute until we are able to call upon you. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand, question or comment. I'm not seeing any from this channel, but I would like our Spanish interpreter able to ask our Spanish participants if we have any questions on the Spanish line. So we'll give a couple of moments for that to happen. Okay, thank you, Abel. Sorry, I was not in the English channel. I was in the off channel, so thank you for responding. Yes, so we do not have any questions from the Spanish line. I'm not seeing any raised hands. Anybody who's calling in, if you would like to press *6 to unmute, and I will call upon you to ask a question. Seeing none. Okay, so that will conclude the question and answer session. If you do have questions or comments that you would like to provide, please email or contact Ryan to give them to us so that we can respond to you. Again, the comment period is open now and is available until and closes on March 17th. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and take care.